damage. Emergency.
Hello, can I have the fire engines, please?
What's wrong?
It's on Maylands Avenue. There's been an explosion.
On a quiet Sunday morning on December 11th, 2005, the town of Hertfordshire was shaken. A powerful explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence, shaking the ground with the force of an earthquake. The roar was so loud that it was heard in 3 countries: Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. Residents who were awakened by the tremor saw a huge column of black smoke rising hundreds of feet into the sky on the horizon. What they were witnessing was the beginning of the largest fire in Europe since World War II. The flames, visible for dozens of miles, engulfed the Buncefield oil depot on the outskirts of Hemel Hempstead. In the blink of an eye, a peaceful suburb of London found itself at the epicenter of a disaster that would go down in British industrial history. And yet, despite the apocalyptic scale of the destruction, what many call a miracle happened. Not a single person died in the fire, which raged for 5 days. But how did a modern facility with multi-level safety systems turn into a fiery inferno? What exactly led to the disaster that changed industrial safety rules across the UK? To understand how this disaster happened, we need to go back a few hours to a world where a single unnoticed failure set off a chain reaction of devastating consequences. The Buncefield oil depot was located on the outskirts of Hemel Hempstead, about an hour's drive north of London. It was not just a fuel depot, it was a strategic facility, the 5th largest oil terminal in the UK, with a storage capacity of around 273 million litres. Built in 1968 by George Wimpey, Buncefield was originally designed for use by oil giants. The terminal was part of a vast network connecting oil storage facilities across the country via underground pipelines. This extensive system allowed fuel to be transported efficiently from large refineries to distribution points. By 2005, Buncefield had become a key hub in the fuel supply chain for the whole of southeast England. The gasoline and jet fuel stored here kept Britain's largest airports running. Every day, hundreds of thousands of liters of fuel passed through the terminal, supporting the region's energy security. The northwestern part of the complex was particularly important, as it housed 6 large tanks numbered 910 to 915. Tank 912 would become the epicenter of the disaster. The tanks were tightly packed to make the most of the space and surrounded by a bund, a strong reinforced concrete wall designed to contain any fuel spills. The safety of the facility was ensured by a comprehensive system of sensors, alarms, and level monitors. Each tank was equipped with a manual level sensor and an independent high-level switch that was supposed to automatically stop the fuel supply when a critical level was reached. The control building was located south of the tanks, and although visibility was limited at night, CCTV cameras allowed operators to monitor the situation. This was the routine, measured work of one of Britain's largest oil storage facilities. Nothing foreshadowed that very soon the familiar order would be disrupted by a disaster of unprecedented scale. It all began on the evening of December 10th, 2005, with a routine operation to fill tank 912. Before the evening shift, the tank was prepared to receive gasoline through a pipeline system. The operation was standard. Tanks were regularly filled, emptied, and refilled to keep the terminal running continuously. According to the plan, fuel was to be delivered to tank 912. The specified flow rate meant that the entire process would take about 14 hours, and the flow direction was to be reversed at approximately 4 a.m. on December 11th, when the tank would be full. However, this routine process was disrupted by technical malfunctions, which the Major Accident Investigation Commission would later identify as key factors in the tragedy. The first critical error was in the level sensor. After maintenance in August 2005, the sensor began to stick, displaying incorrect data. In effect, this meant that operators in the control room were seeing incorrect information about the amount of fuel in the tank. The second link in the chain of failures was the failure of an independent high-level switch. This device was the last line of defense. It was supposed to automatically stop the fuel supply if the level in the tank exceeded the safe limit, and activate the alarm. When it was time to change the fuel supply route at 4 a.m., the display in the control room showed that tank 912 was only 96.4% full, and the process continued. At this time, an unrelated problem arose with the tanker loading system. It required the attention of the control room supervisor, who was forced to leave his post. This combination of factors, faulty safety systems, lack of regular checks, and operator distraction, created the perfect conditions for a disaster. Total and other organizations responsible for various aspects of the terminal's operations and maintenance failed to ensure the necessary level of safety. The increase in the depot's throughput capacity meant that operators focused more on speed than on checking safety systems. As a result of these factors, no one suspected that irreversible consequences were already unfolding beyond the walls of the control room. At 5:30 a.m. on December 11th, unnoticed by the personnel in the control room, tank 912 began to overflow. Gasoline quietly overflowed through ventilation holes in the roof, flowing down the outer wall into the concrete reinforcement around the tank. A faulty sensor continued to show that the tank was only 96.4% full, and the alarm connected to the high-level switch remained silent. In the darkness of the early December morning, the spilled fuel began to evaporate, forming a rich, combustible mixture of gasoline vapors and air. This invisible but deadly gas began to spread throughout the depot. A light morning breeze carried the cloud away from the control building, where unsuspecting operators continued their work. At approximately 5:45 a.m., the situation worsened. Due to the completion of another transfer operation at the depot, the rate of gasoline flow into tank 912 increased. This only accelerated the spill, and soon the volume of spilled fuel reached an incredible 400,000 liters of gasoline. According to the MIIB investigation, by this time the cloud of gasoline vapors had reached a diameter of about 1,200 feet, spreading across parking lots, buildings, and nearby areas. The concentration of vapors in this cloud was within the flammable range. The slightest spark would have been enough to ignite it. Some tanker drivers in the area later reported smelling a strong odor of gasoline. However, in the pre-dawn chaos, no one had time to relay this information to the control room or take any action. As the vapor cloud continued to grow, the danger increased with every passing minute. The vapor cloud, invisible to most people on the premises, had the potential destructive power equivalent to several tons of explosives. At around 6 a.m., someone at the depot finally noticed the problem and manually activated the fire alarm. This action triggered the fire pump, which was located in a special room on the premises. The irony of the situation was that the fire protection system became the trigger for an unprecedented disaster. The cloud of vapors, saturated with gasoline fumes, came into contact with a spark, creating the perfect conditions for a powerful explosion. At 6:01 a.m. on December 11, 2005, a powerful explosion occurred, equivalent to the detonation of 29.5 tons of TNT. The ignited cloud of gasoline vapors created a shockwave of tremendous force. The ground shook, and the British Geological Survey recorded a tremor measuring 2.4 on the Richter scale, similar to a small earthquake, which is very rare in this area. The blast wave spread for several miles, blowing out windows and doors in homes, schools, and churches. At the Northgate Information Solutions office, located next to the depot, the explosion blew out every single window. By a lucky coincidence, only 4 employees were in the building at the early hour on Sunday morning, instead of the usual 400. David Mitchell, who lives 1,300 feet from the depot, later told reporters that he felt his house shake and vibrate. His 5-year-old daughter slept through the explosion, but woke up to find her home damaged, with cracked walls and broken windows. Repairs to their home subsequently cost £200,000. The explosion immediately ignited the spilled gasoline, and the fire quickly engulfed tank 912 and then spread to neighboring tanks. Within minutes, the flames engulfed 20 large fuel tanks. Columns of fire rose hundreds of feet into the sky and a black cloud of smoke was visible 68 miles away, as far as Lincolnshire. The situation worsened due to subsequent explosions at 6:27 a.m., forcing firefighters who had arrived at the scene to temporarily retreat for their own safety. These secondary explosions heightened panic among local residents. Local police, initially suspecting that the explosions could be the result of a terrorist attack, began an urgent evacuation of the area. People fled their homes in a hurry, escaping the smoke and potential new explosions. Many left without knowing if they would ever be able to return. At 6:08 a.m., a state of emergency was declared, activating coordination between police, fire, and medical services. About 150 firefighters were rushed to the scene. The nearby M1 motorway was closed in both directions to restrict access to the scene and ensure unobstructed passage for emergency services. By 7 a.m., there were already about 25 fire engines, 20 support vehicles, and up to 180 personnel at the scene. Their main task was to first contain the fire and then extinguish it. It was one of the largest fires in British history, and resources were brought in from across the country to help fight it. By noon on December 11th, 6 hours after the first explosion, only 10 of the 20 separate fires had been extinguished. Firefighters faced a serious problem. Even if they managed to extinguish the fire in one tank, it could reignite from numerous fires nearby. Under a giant cloud of black smoke and surrounded by flames, Mansfield became the epicenter of a disaster, the likes of which Britain had not seen in decades. It took 5 days of continuous work by firefighters to completely extinguish the fire at Mansfield. The main fires were extinguished within 2 days, but one tank reignited. As it was relatively isolated, firefighters decided to let it burn out naturally. It was not until December 15th, 5 days after the explosion, that the area was completely cleared of fire. Thanks in large part to the early morning hour of the explosion on Sunday, when most people were at home rather than at work. No one was killed in the Mansfield disaster. This was considered a miracle, given the scale of the explosions, the huge clouds of smoke, and the significant property damage. 43 people were injured, only 2 of whom suffered serious injuries. Physical damage covered a wide area. Within a mile of the epicenter, buildings were significantly damaged. Windows were blown out, walls cracked, and doors were torn off. Within a radius of up to 5 miles, minor damage was reported, such as broken glass and cracked window frames. The British Geological Survey collected more than 3,000 questionnaires from residents, confirming that the explosion was felt at this distance. The explosion also caused serious environmental damage. About 300 tons of gasoline leaked into the soil and groundwater. The firefighting foam contained a toxic and bioaccumulative chemical. In May 2006, huge concentrations of a toxic chemical from firefighting foam were found in a well near Mansfield, 59 times higher than current safety standards. The nearest well and pumping station were closed until 2009, when levels of the hazardous substance fell to acceptable levels. A government investigation found that key safety systems installed to prevent overflow had all failed individually. Neither the sensor that was supposed to activate when the tank overflowed, nor the alarm it was supposed to trigger were in working order. Several established safety procedures were not followed, and the concrete wall surrounding the tanks was unable to contain the entire spill. The legal consequences were far-reaching. 5 companies were found guilty of violating safety and environmental regulations. The total amount of fines and legal costs amounted to approximately £10 million. More than 2,700 insurance claims were filed by local residents and businesses. Although Total and Texaco admitted responsibility, they subsequently contested a large number of claims, which prolonged the process for many years. Some claims took almost 7 years to resolve. Even a decade later, some residents expressed doubts about the safety of drinking water in the area, given the amount of fuel spilled and the chemicals used. The Mansfield disaster led to significant changes in UK oil industry legislation and practices. As there was an extensive network of sites similar to Mansfield in the country, a series of new regulations were introduced after the investigation to prevent a repeat of the disaster. Regulations governing the operation of facilities handling hazardous substances were significantly tightened. Mandatory requirements for more reliable fuel level monitoring systems were introduced. Requirements for secondary spill containment systems were strengthened. Regular safety audits and mandatory stress tests for equipment were introduced. The HSE issued updated guidelines for oil storage operators, requiring continuous monitoring of tank filling, improved button design, and regular risk management training for personnel. More reliable automatic monitoring systems with redundant mechanisms and remote control have been introduced in the oil industry. Mandatory level sensor tests have been introduced before each tank filling. New standards require greater capacity and pressure resistance. UK oil companies have revised their staff training procedures, placing greater emphasis on process safety rather than operational efficiency. Regular accident response drills have been introduced, including scenarios involving major fires. Today, the Bansfield site has changed significantly. Following extensive reconstruction between 2006 and 2010, the oil storage facility continues to operate, but on a smaller scale than in 2005. The terminal still receives fuel via pipeline and distributes it, mainly to aviation in the southeast of England. The environmental damage has been largely remedied. The UK Environment Agency has carried out regular groundwater monitoring and cleanup of contaminated sites. By 2009, water quality had returned to normal, and wells were reopened. The water in the area has been officially declared safe, although some residents continue to express concerns. Interestingly, there are no official memorials or commemorative plaques dedicated to the disaster in Hemel Hempstead. This may be due to the lack of casualties, which reduced public demand for commemorating the event. However, local residents and the media remember the disaster every year, especially on the anniversary. The residential areas around the depot have been completely renovated, and life has returned to normal, although some residents continue to suffer psychological effects. Bansfield remains a symbol of industrial disaster in the UK, and its lessons have been incorporated into safety education programs. The Bansfield disaster, the largest fire in Europe since World War II, did not begin with a spectacular accident, but with an unnoticed malfunction and a series of missed checks. One faulty safety system, one minor test missed, one distraction, and the result was an explosion that shook 3 countries and a fire that took 5 days to extinguish. The story of Bansfield is a reminder of how thin the line is between routine and disaster. In a world of high technology and automation, the human factor remains a critical element of safety. Complacency and neglect of inspections prove to be just as dangerous as faulty equipment. Today, Bansfield is not only a restored industrial site, but also a living reminder to the oil industry of the price of complacency. Every tank, every sensor, every alarm system is now checked with double the care, and firefighters trained for scenarios that once seemed unimaginable. This disaster has become a symbol of how a few unnoticed malfunctions, left unattended, can turn into a destructive force, and why a culture of safety must be a priority, not a formality. The story of Bansfield raises important questions. What is happening today at industrial sites near our homes? What sleeping dangers may lurk behind the fence of an ordinary factory? Have you ever witnessed a man-made accident or industrial disaster? Perhaps you live near a potentially dangerous facility. Share your stories and thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like this video, as this greatly increases its chances of being recommended by YouTube. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about incredible disasters. Take care, and see you in the next episodes.